Hello, how are you? Welcome to a new class. In this class, we are going to be conducting the first lab within this module on mass management of Omnily instances using Ansible. We should remember that the deploy 2009 and from now on, all the management of the instance that we are going to deploy now, and assuming that we're going to work with more than one instance, which in fact we are going to do in the later labs, that management is going to be done from a node that we are going to refer to the deploy manager or simply the deployer, which is distinctly separate from the target host where we will be impacting those installations, updates or backup restores. We must understand the concept that it is remote provisioning of deploys. Here, we will need to work with a workstation, which could be the IT administrator's own workstation, for example. It can also be a virtual machine or a virtual server where the entire IT team accesses when each member needs to perform tasks, provision updates, or deploy necessary actions. But I insist again, this must be remote, and each of these hosts we manage in the inventory file must contain the public key of this deployer, this deploy manager, because the connection is via SSH using a public key. So, the first thing we need to do is to prepare this deployer instance, that the only thing you need is to be able to run a bash script, and have Ansible installed. To install Ansible, either on Mac or Linux, there are several ways and a lot of documentation. What we do have to keep in mind is that I can run here in the deployer. In the deployer, I'm just here, showing. Have Ansible installed to check. I'm looking for, I don't remember, but good. As you can see, I'm already pulling Ansible playbook and is responding to me. Well, here it tells me, if so, Ansible playbook version. I already have Ansible installed. What I'm showing on an instance, let's say on a machine with OS X. But, well, Ansible is installed either with pip or with the distribution's own packaging system of the operating system that we're using. So, it's very trivial to install Ansible. The important thing is to have Ansible installed. The important thing is to have a public key already generated, and then assign it to the servers that we are going to deploy. What I just did is download the OML deploy tool, repository by Git, right? That is the repository that we have been working on. We have been talking about. I just do a git clone of this repository using that is the base of the deploy manager, isn't it? I am here inside the repository. I look at the part of Ansible, and here of the part of Ansible, I have just the deploy script, esh, that is who is going to end up launching the execution of that Ansible playbook on my remote host. Then I also have here a host that is an instance of Debian 12. That as well, we have already emphasized, but we are going to do it again, has to have a interface or a public IP for which the users are going to access. And on the other hand, a private IP that has to do with the internal networking part so that the different components, in some cases, operate at private interface level, taking care that all the services, for security reasons, are opened here and not in the public IP, or to be able to discern at least which services listen in the public IP and which ones internally, simply at local level. We have then the target server on which we are going to apply the deploy. We have the deploy manager or deployer, which in this case is my own workstation with Ansible installed. I am currently missing, and now I need to create my inventory file. The inventory file, as well explained in the documentation, is that we are going to generate from a template that is included inside the repository itself. However, this file is going to reside in a subfolder called Instances. So inside of, look, I'm here in the root of the repository. In the root of the repository, deploy tool, I'm going to move inside of Ansible, and in there I'm going to make a directory called Instances. Yes? So here I have one now, my Instances folder. So, 2009. According to the SL, here I have Instances. I just created it, and over that Instances file, Instances directory, I can start creating subdirectories where I organize my different host groups of omniliads. So I might be able to, for example, have ka, my group of instances of test. Ka, for example. So I'm going to create one for me. And I can have my production instances. So now I have inside of the instances directory that I just created, inside the Ansible directory, 2 folders. And what I'm going to do now is copy the inventory file that's here in the root of the Ansible repository from the Ansible folder inside, for example, instances, test. So now I have here inside, I'm going to see it easier in my code editor. Here inside Ansible, I have just created instances. Notice this folder is like this. Already the editor itself puts it to me of another color. Why? Because this folder is ignored at Git level, just so we can work. Here, there is a gitignore in the root of the repository, and we see that among several directories, what is Ansible instances is there cited so that it is not traced at the level of Git level, Then, well, here already in test qua, I have my inventory file, that what I did is to make a copy of the inventory YAML that comes in the root or in the part of Ansible inside omeletploy tool in Ansible. There is the inventory. This inventory file is who actually keeps the collection of hosts, the inventory, just precisely the stock of all the hosts that I want to manage using my deploy manager. Then here I'm going to have some structures or templates, for example, the management of hosts, AIO of the type deployment of the type AIO. And well, then we have the horizontal clustering part, the high availability clustering. But well, it is not yet time for those labs. I'm going to get to work here. This I edit it myself because this is no longer tracked as a Git file inside the repository. Then I could put here, for example, the name of the instance that I'm about to deploy. Let's put course, the course. This is how the instance is going to be called. Then I'm going to put here tenant ID. We are going to see if all this is useful. Course. And here, I have to indicate the public IP. That is the IP by which I'm going to access to the host to make the deployment. And here inside, simply to inform for the configuration issue, the private IP that my host is going to have. So I turn now to my host here in the cloud to get this information out of me. IP, public, and the private IP as it is. This is a cloud server. The environment, let's say the environment is in the cloud. And by default, this inventory file is already set in its general variables as cloud. So I'm not going to touch anything, just like the time zone. I am going to do a totally basic installation with the variables simply that are there, available. Note that I could comment or delete because I am not using it. They are always mere examples. So for example, in what are the AIO instances? Simply, for a matter of cleanliness, I'm going to leave it like that. I am going to leave only one AIO instance that is called course. That is the one that we are going to be deploying. And here below, in the part of the hosts that I'm going to choose to carry out the actions, well, actually, I am going to do only the course host. The rest, I am going to comment. No, delete. You don't have to delete this down here. So this part, AIO, data voice app, and not delete if you can delete these or comment the host list, but not these statements above. Then notice that here in the third section of the file, I say that for my set, my group of AIO servers, I'm going to enable only this one, which is course, which is the one I declared above with IP, with the IPS, and the name of the tenant. And with that, I am already, well, here I have all the images that I'm going to use, the components as we had in Docker Compose. But well, I'm not going to mess with upgrades yet. I'm just doing a fresh install using the latest stable release of OmniLeads and this deployment format through Ansible. So I simply tapped this down here to indicate on which host I want to take the action. And I tapped up here the actual host statement, this that I want to deploy. So now, yes, just notice that I am here inside Ansible in my repository here in my local workstation. I'm going to do the following: deploy, action. I want to do an installation. And here, less tenant. Notice how interesting this part is. I'm going to tell you now on which inventory file I want to perform this installation action. And we said it was test, QA. There in test QA. Let's see here. Test QA. And that is the name of the file. There I stored changes. So I'm saying my deploy tool performs actions on this host stock inventory file. And I have only, if you see here, there are some things declared at the level of on which host I'm going to execute this deploy action. It's only on this course. So if I hit enter, we're going to see now that this deployment is carried out. And this is going to be making a connection via SSH. And notice that although the output, let's say, the output of my command from my deploy action I'm seeing here on my local desktop station. However, these actions are taking place on my remote host. So well, here are carried out a whole series of prerequisite tasks that have to do with the installation of some dependencies, the installation of Podman. As orchestrator, engine would be of container engine. Well, some other directory are created, certificates are copied, and all a question of precisely what does Ansible, that is to prepare a host to then deploy an application on top, and with the passage of time to be managing this application. Well, now we continue to see checks and checks, the structure that have the playbook that is called and task in Ansible is that component to component. Go deploying what is necessary. Even notice that it tries to do this, disabling firewalls. if this failure is ignored, just is contemplated that if the firewall is not installed, UFW fails, but that does not imply that it crashes, that the execution is cut off. This takes a while, takes a little longer than the first boot installer method with Docker Compose, by a matter no longer of the fact that these commands are remote. It also depends on the internet connection the deployer has. As I was saying, this deployer can easily be a server that the IT area contemplates for this purpose, and that is shared access by the different members of the IT team that manage OmniLeads. It could also be that each member of the OmniLead team has on their own workstation a copy of the deploy tool. That is, they have their own deploy manager, and that's where we will be. Classes ahead, explaining a little bit. A possibility to track this folder directly from instances. I have the instances folder of Ansible with my server groups. In this folder, I can have production and test environments. And I could also have another folder where I will manage various instances hosted in some infrastructure. For example, I don't know, these are all the instances that I have in the cloud with the provider, DigitalOcean. And so I build the collections of my host, and based on that, I apply deploys. These deploys, well, as you know, have an impact on my server groups. I could have an inventory file with these four instances. I could have also another inventory file, only with these two on one side and these two on the other side, because they are in different clouds. Or, depending on the criteria I choose, I can make that ordering. And, well, here already is starting to deploy components. It goes by Minio, follows with Postgres, then it will go Redis, then it will go RT-Penguin, and the rest of those of the components. This basically is going to be something analogous to what is Docker Compose, so to speak, only that well. Here, as we have mentioned, we have introduced each component is based on a systemd file that is the starter of the container that materializes the component one environment variables file for that container. To use the environment variables, let's go for Redis. And well, what I wanted to finish rounding is that this folder of instances, in the event that maybe the IT group decides to work on their own personal workstation. But well, you have to keep the inventories suitable for the whole IT team. You can make this a private Git folder, obviously, because here there is sensitive information, there are passwords, there are IP addresses, there is access, no more and no less. But well, this can easily be made a private repository of the company itself, and the IT team can work with these inventories and apply them. Commits, keep, a versioning of the infrastructure of the OmniLead hosts that manage this company of the subscribers. Here it already goes for the part of asterisks. Raising the service, we can also go entering to see what we have. Then, this was of my host. I'm going to enter, and already notice that instead of Docker, we are going to begin to invoke puts ps, and here I already have some components that already began to raise. For example, puts logs f oml ready server. They're inside Logs, I see that ready is already up. And well, while we make time that the deploy is concrete, we can see, for example, that I have now in its default Redis environment variables. Here I have a Redis environment variable file with two simple variables. But then we are going to see that in systemd. System. I have Redis service. That what it is actually doing is a container run. It is not Docker. It is Podman. Just because of this integration that we have talked about. And well, it finishes being a Podman run of the image of Redis that publishes the project Omniliads, and well with some parameters, among them the one of environment variables. Then it ends up being a container running within the host with its environment variables file that is running in line with the rest of the components. So we already see that is already up here, asterisk. Kamalio and FastAGI WebSocket server is already in Daphne. The part of web asynchrony already comes by Django. The web application as such. And while this already starts to be there, we can also start to see a symmetry. In fact, each component to deploy is a playbook, USIN, that generally has between 3, 4, or 5 instructions. That is the copy of the templates, the render, let's say, of the templates, Jinja of Ansible for what is the service, and the environment variables. And then the service starter. Here we are already in the cron in Jinx. We're quite close to finishing. Here we are. Django logs, just like we had in Docker Compose. We have the OML manage as a script to manage Omnileads for execution used when one enters Omnileads to the instance by SSH. They're apparently already raised ausend. So, I'm going to now access the host over the web. And here we are. We are just going to launch a reset pass the first time to whiten the password. Surely this action will be automated soon to avoid having to log in to do it by SSH. But, well, the current state of the art is this. I have there, then my instance I exceeded, and now I'm going to make an initialization of environment. Notice that here, successfully completed the installation. It even leaves me all the observability part pre-configured ready to be invoked. We will see. And here inside the server, while I initialized now some data, as I always do, simply to advance